Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
On this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm delighted to be welcoming Julia Milner. She's a global academic and a thought leader in coaching, leadership, and communication. Julia, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Let's start, as we always do, with your career journey. You've been through several pivots and challenges, as we'll often find in our career, starting in management consulting before moving towards academia in a range of universities and business schools around the world. You're the leader of a coaching development institution, and you still teach students about leadership, positive psychology, and work culture. And you're a 40 under 40 Best Business School professor. I'd love to know, how did this extraordinary career unfold? How much of it was according to design? How much of it was about serendipity? And what are you most proud of? And what have you been most challenged by as you've gone through it?
Was it planned? Was it not planned? I guess parts of it were planned and then parts not. So I love the expression, life is happening while you're busy making other plans. And I think that happens to a lot of us, doesn't it? And it kind of happened to me too. So I very much enjoyed my studies. I always thought about doing a PhD, and I was lucky enough to, during my PhD, spend some time at Harvard University in collaboration with Oxford. And I also spent some time at 3 Australian universities. So I was exposed, I guess, to a lot of different frameworks and things. And I started quite young, I guess, also with doing some consulting on the side. And so I first started as a communication consultant, training policemen and politicians in communication skills. And I absolutely loved that. And then while I was doing that, a lot of people just came to me and were like, hey, do you also do coaching? Or can you tell me here and there? And I was like, oh, no, I don't think I can. I'm not a coach, so I don't know. And so during my PhD studies, I then embarked on my second master's in business coaching and change management. And I guess there also I was quite young, because I guess during that time, it was more that you were like more older, and then you kind of like pivoted from your main career into coaching. And so it was still kind of like that agenda that as a coach, you needed to have all the answers, even though that's not the approach that was taught, but that was kind of like with it. So, but I went with it and I did that. And then I moved to Australia and I started my own coaching practice there. And I always kept a foot in the door with academia. So I always taught several different universities. I lectured for some time, like, I don't know, a day per week or however it played out. And I was told quite often at the early start of my career, Julia, you have to make a decision. It's either academia or it's practice industry. You cannot do both. That's not how it works. That's not how it should be. And I struggled with that a lot. I loved the both parts, and I actually thought they're helping each other, because I think I was a better teacher or professor because I was also experiencing and doing the work myself. And so I always felt a bit like weird, like, how can I, teach these people if I don't know this? But vice versa, when I was doing the consulting work, I also thought I benefited hugely from, doing also the research and being up to date with latest developments. So then there was a time where I moved more towards management consultancy. And then there was a time where I moved then more towards academia. But I would say I've always been between the two worlds, and I've always moved around the globe quite a bit. And I think either you can see this all as a disadvantage and the limitations, because they are there. So if you want to focus on them, I think you can. Or you can leverage the benefits, the strength, and the uniqueness that it gives. I think both are possible. And I'm not saying that every day I was like, oh, wow, this is great. There were also many days where I struggled, but I tried to see the positives. And I think in the end, it helped me with my career and it made me have a different perspective. But I want to tell all the people out there, or maybe especially the ones who are starting out in their career, that there will always be people who tell you that it cannot be done and that your pathway doesn't exist. And I think you have to take like little steps sometimes and just see what happens.
Beautiful. I love that. Sounds like you're talking about a sort of minimum viable progress. Just try and see what happens, see if it works, and ignore the naysayers. When you think about all the different places you've worked, whether it be those impressive academic institutions or the organizations you've consulted in, you've worked alongside all kinds of brilliant leaders and thinkers and doers. What would you say are one or two standout lessons that you've learned from them?
The best leaders were always those who empowered others and were not holding on to power, controlling or micromanaging, but really leaders coach approach. They were always the ones who stood out to me. Also those who have empathy and walk the talk. And the third thing that was standing out is those who can, well, I would almost say reframe mistakes, label it more into learning, and kind of like stay a bit humble on the way. And I guess always keep learning. I think that's another quintessence that I would say.
You said leaders who have empathy. Is empathy in your world something that you're just born with, or is it something that we can and should be working on getting more of?
I think it's both. We do have to also talk about the dark side, which is executives, leaders, the higher percentage of narcissists, psychopaths, and so on you have there. So I guess there are also people who are misuse empathy and play it. But having said that, empathy is one of the skills that I researched and that I teach in my leadership programs when I support leaders to embrace this, empowering leadership style, so the leader as coach style. So empathy is one of the key skills. And of course, there are things that you can do in terms of do's and don'ts. And I think a lot of people are getting that wrong. So that does not mean that you don't have empathy. Maybe you have even too much of it, but it's more about how you transfer it and how you can help others. And I think there are a lot of skills and, as I said, like approaches that you can learn to actually really be there in the moment, to really listen and not to fall, for example, for the advice trap. Because a lot of leaders confuse empathy with, oh, I totally know how you're feeling, I totally understand, and so on, and wanting to solve it. And that's not necessarily a helpful approach for all situations. Then I also encountered a lot of leaders who saying they don't want to do it or show empathy because number one, it makes them weak and vulnerable, and they don't want that because it can be used against them. And the second fear I hear a lot is, well, if I kind of like open it up, so it's all about negative in the sense of what's going wrong, what's your problem, then the employee starts to cry and the whole thing opens up. So that's another thing. Of course, I cannot turn leaders into professional coaches with like a 3 or 5 day leadership coaching program, but I certainly can support them. And, I've shown it in the research that I did as well, that leaders can learn the core coaching skills. And my answer then always is, well, wouldn't we want more leaders who can listen, ask questions, show empathy? Wouldn't that be helpful in these current environments? And so to answer your question, yeah, of course, for some people, it comes more natural to show empathy. And again, there's a difference between showing it and having it. So there are also two different sides.
Definitely. Thank you. That was a lovely rabbit hole to go down. Let's talk about the different transitions you've made, including geographical. What would you say is the most challenging or disruptive transition that you've ever made from one context to another?
All of them have been really disruptive. I think sometimes people underestimate the implication of moving and how much energy, whether this is mental or, organizational, it takes to establish yourself again in a new place. And I mean, I usually always went kind of like for a longer period. So not just like, I don't know, 1 month stay, although I also had those, which those are much easier to, organize and to do, but to really kind of like settle in and to establish all of your new circles, whether this is friends or work or even administrative tasks, is highly, highly underestimated. Having said that, it of course comes also with a lot of adventure and excitement. And I always, loved exploring the new places and establishing myself in these cultures. And I think key was always to have early on connections with locals who, of course, help you to do this transition, as well as keeping my ties and connections back home. So I also, I guess, invested a lot of time and energy in doing that.
Definitely. Connection is key, for sure. As you think about all the personal learning and experience and thinking about corporate culture, leadership, work life, all these issues, what advice do you have for early career professionals who are looking to start out?
Start with your values. So start reflecting what success means to you, how you define success. Reflect what values drive you, what gets you out of bed in the morning, what motivates you. Also, invest as much time in developing your strength, in trying to fix your weaknesses, I think is another one. And then I would also love to take some of the pressure off the early career people, because I think what happens a lot is that we think this is the once in a lifetime decision and either my life turns out good or bad. Especially nowadays, it's kind of like building blocks and here and there. And it's not so much like this straight line, and to embrace that more. So taking the pressure off a bit, and in that same thought, really taking care of your well-being, also especially your mental well-being, I think is very important in these times.
Definitely. Tough times. Let's talk more. You've touched on it already about your opinion on leading by not having an answer. Your TED Talk posits that it's more often than not better not to give advice. That resonates with both of us, as we're both coaches and enjoy the curious questioning process that assumes that the person opposite us is whole and has the answer within. Can you please tell us more about how you've developed your conviction in this regard?
If you just think about how people are promoted into leadership positions, it's usually because you do a great technical job. So you have great technical expertise, whether that's now marketing or engineering or whatever it is. Then you get promoted and all of a sudden you are leading a team, which requires totally different skill set. But I think the trap is that because you were so good at your technical job, you kind of like think you need to now provide all the answers, because otherwise, why are you in this leadership position? But as a leader nowadays, you cannot have all the answers to everything. It's absolutely impossible. The leader cannot be the expert in everything anymore. So we need something else. And what alerted me was, if you look at current polls, still nowadays, micromanagement has been labeled as the biggest red flag in toxic workplaces. So micromanagement is existing, but we kind of like think, oh, it's this mean, person who yells and screams at people. But I mean, they exist, but that's not the big part of it. Micromanaging is also like kind of like trying to provide the answer for everything. And what this creates is then with leaders is these bottleneck situations where you have to touch base, you have to CC in every email, you have to, and that costs not only the leader themselves time, energy, not to be able to focus on strategic tasks. It costs the organization, but it also costs the employee, because most people are not motivated by micromanagement. They're actually much more motivated being part of the process, being part of the answer, and coming up with ideas and innovation. And that's always what we are saying. Oh, we need more innovation, but how do people think this is going to happen? Not by giving advice for everything. So that's how I came about it. And I kind of like stumbled upon what I coined motivational micromanagement, because if you ask leaders without any coaching training to coach another person, which is the kind of like instruction a lot of leaders are getting these days. Somebody from the executive team says, "Oh, we should do more coaching. So, hey, let's just coach your team a bit more." And what most leaders are doing, and I proved it in my research, is they do motivational micromanagement, which means they use a lot of chaka and hey and why don't you, and you could go and try this, or haven't you thought about doing that? So they hide their advice behind closed questions, but they're still micromanaging. And that's not, as I said, really motivating for people. And that's why I so much invested in helping leaders learn these coaching skills. And again, they can learn it in a very short amount of time, but most leaders have to learn it.
Thank you for making that distinction and reminding us that there is this tendency to call every kind of didactic statement coaching. And generally, that is just totally the reverse of what real coaching is. But yes, thank you also for your contribution to the world of leaders having some more skills, at least in this regard. You are deeply against holding regrets and have an alternative viewpoint. Can you give us a sense of that?
It's something that happens to a lot of people, whether we want to admit it or not, that we regret things. Although, apparently people regret more the things they didn't do than the things they did do.
Yes, indeed.
But it's more like a shift in mindset, and it goes in the same direction to relabel mistakes into the learning opportunities. And so, to really reestablish that, because even if you look at all the successful people, whether that's sportsmen or business or entrepreneurs, it's more about how you can recover, how quickly you can adapt. And I think that's the same for leadership as well. So this is more like about self-leadership, what we can do to rephrase and reframe this. And I think, because you asked me before about early career, we often so much think about, wow, this is either the right or the wrong decision. It's either this or that. And to kind of like be a bit more kinder to ourselves and to embrace more this positive psychology approach of thinking, which does not mean that we have to, fall for what Susan David coined as toxic positivity. So everything is fantastic or so. That's not the way down, but to really self-lead and also then lead others in a more kinder way, and to focus more on gratitude and everything. And I'm having such a big emphasis on this because we also know from recent polls and statistics that mental illnesses are increasing. People are very stressed, and we unfortunately cannot change most of the time the events that are happening, but we always can work on our own mindset. And again, this does not mean going from this is awful to this is fantastic, but to just be kinder to yourself. And I think if you're kinder to yourself, then you also are able to be there for others.
Definitely. That's lovely. Let's turn to the subject of career transitions or pivots. You're a pretty good exponent of this yourself. What insights have you gained that would help our audience to be more courageous about making big changes, especially in these turbulent times?
I don't know if it always has to be big changes, because I think if you look at it from a huge change, then you're right, it is scary. So I always try to more think about how can you kind of like make progress on the way and make smaller steps. It depends on what it is for you. For me, the vehicle has always been learning. And I personally like structured learning. So even though I'm a professor at a business school, I'm now doing my 4th master's degree, because I just think, I just think you have to walk the talk. I'm much more understanding of my students, because, I know how it is if the deadline is there and you forgot it and something comes up and the cat ate the homework and something came in between. It's my approach. And I know that that's not everybody's approach, but I think learning is a good vehicle. It doesn't have to be always a degree. It can be self-learning, a YouTube video, or this or that. But for me, this has helped me a lot, because doing 4 different degrees from different perspectives and in different areas makes you always look at issues from different angles, which I find quite interesting. And then if I look back, I actually always was in different departments. So I've not always been in the business department. I've been in the education department, communication department, more psychology department. So actually, this was literally done by accident. It was never like, oh, wow. It was more probably due to that my areas of expertise. So I guess early on coaching, we're always allocated in different places. And so you could look at it from different angles. That was my way. Others have other ways, but I'm also, for example, a big believer in side projects or pivoting, starting things out. I also learn a lot by doing. So I started 2 YouTube channels and started a clothing line, and in baby steps. I did not like, okay, and now gonna quit everything and I'm gonna start and this whole new thing. Then you also see some things work out and some things don't. Of course, the negative side or the downside is, of course, time. If you focus just on one project and dedicate all your efforts into it, then you have probably higher risk. But if it works, it's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I think I've seen in recent years, for example, a shift in younger students who really are drawn towards entrepreneurship and doing this because it seems to be like glorified and this is fantastic. But I always say to people, you need to look into the lifestyle of your career or your job. And with lifestyle, I don't mean whether you can buy yourself the $1 million yacht or whatever it is. Lifestyle means, do you like the lifestyle of your job? So whether this is, shift work or working long hours or traveling a lot. And there might be different times in your life where you prefer one or the other, but always look at your lifestyle and the life as a whole, because at the end of the day, your career is one part of your life, but it is not your life and it has to fit with all the other parts. And there are times in your career where maybe other things take priority and it's coming back to what we discussed at the very beginning. Do often a value check-in. Your core values probably stay quite stable, but other values might change over time. For example, how much freedom or how much flexibility you want or need, or how much security you want, and so on. So I think that's very helpful to do that as well.
Brilliant. Is there anything that you would add beyond those very wise words if you were given the chance to speak to your 18-year-old self? Is there anything else you would want to tell her beyond what you've just shared?
Breathe, relax,
Yeah.
and enjoy. I think these would be the three
Relax
things.
and enjoy. That's perfect.
Yeah. Probably the fourth thing I would add is kind of like really gratitude and mindfulness, being in the moment. Because often, we're so busy and then things have passed and then you're like, oh, wow, what happened? And I also think that there is a beauty even in very challenging situations. And so embrace the season that you are in.
Let's go back to the world of work. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world of work, what would it be?
At the moment, it would really be how much focus, but also the general attitude towards well-being. Because still well-being is seen as something for the weak, more like physical well-being. And the harder you grind, the stronger you are. That goes in the same notion, I guess, for leadership, empathy, vulnerability, and so on. So you can be both. You can be strong and empathetic. You can be vulnerable and hold up your boundaries. And I think to allow the space for both things, I think for the long term, building organizational cultures that last, this is very important. Of course, short term, yes, you can be successful with other leadership approaches, but I think for the long term, it's good to be kind.
Definitely. Julia, what are your most exciting projects for the second half of 2025? We're almost there.
You scare me now. You scare me. Taking on my own advice, although I don't like to give advice, but I guess this is kind of like the self-coaching is. So it means, to really just be in the moment, enjoy the moment, be kind. But in terms of projects, so I brought out my own workout clothing line, Taya Moon, and I'm very excited about that. It's kind of like catering to the transition of implementing small habits into your daily life. So the clothes are that you can wear them for both work and work out. And so, for example, at lunchtime, you can just swap in your sneakers and then, walk around, and they have like positive vibes messages stitched in them, but more like hidden. So
Lovely.
in the inside or like small in the back. And I think that's something I want to focus on because I think that's important. And then I'm bringing out a new book called Habit Maker, which I'm very excited about, which also goes in the same direction of small habits and how you do it, but moreover a mind shift. Because at the end of the day, you can have perfect actions and plans, and then one slip to the side, and then people give it up. So I did some research about habits, and that was slip up and gave up was one of the things that came up. So I think we have to, again, also there start more as seeing mistakes as just a learning process, and how can you get back on the train again.
Beautiful. Julia, this has been a lovely conversation and most inspiring. Thank you so much for joining me. I know that listeners will listen to it. Please make sure that you share your clothing line link with us as well as everything else. And we'll make sure that they get that too. And habits will be made for sure.
Thank you so much, Claire, for these wonderful questions. I'm like really inspired, reflecting a bit more. So thank you so much for having me.
It's a real pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.